Alright, so this morning we've got a Bear's lime tree. And it's going to show up close here. See, the leaves have a little bit of a residue. Now, I've been wiping some off, so some of them are already cleaned. Well, this is not powdery mildew. This lime has just been sitting inside of a warehouse bay for I think like 10 months or something. So basically, because it hasn't been outside, it hasn't been getting rain and wind to wash its leaves. Right, so you can see there's all these, this is different stuff that's stirred up from the air in that warehouse bay. And you can see it's kind of built up on the leaves. So all I'm going to do is wash it off. A little bit of paper towel. You want to do this for your indoor houseplants, eh? Because houseplants get the same thing, where you know, especially if you have like a wood stove or you live near a road and you get a lot of dust in your house, or you have pets. The dust lands on the leaves and it clogs the pores of the leaf, and it makes it harder for the plant to transpire, to respirate, to synthesize. So just by giving your houseplants a quick wiping down the leaves, you help keep the plant healthy. You know, like I said, you know, in nature the rain does this, the rain and the wind, and insect activity and browsing and all sorts of stuff. You know. So I'm going to wipe down all of these. And here actually I'll wipe down half of this one. So it's kind of hard to see. So there's some residue on the paper towel. It's just difficult to see because the paper towel is already really grainy. Yeah, I'll show you one half done. So see on the right half, it's been wiped, and on the left half, I chose to film this into the sun, right on. There, so I'm just gonna finish wiping down this plant here. As you do this, you can see the residue on the tissue. I like doing this with a paintbrush too. A little cup of like very light dilution soapy water, like the tiny, like the smallest fragment of soap you can get in there. I'll sometimes use, but you don't need soap. You can just use water, plain cold water, warm water, whatever. Now, if you're gonna go like wiping down leaves like this, You know, like say if you're gonna do this type of thing, like, you know, you're putting moisture on the leaf, right? So you should be doing this in the morning so that the moisture can evaporate throughout the day. Probably don't want to wipe down a bunch of leaves at night, depending on what plant you're wiping down. If you put a bunch of moisture on at night, it might help the right life cycle of the right strain of the right mold, right fungus to take hold. If you have something like powdery mildew on your leaves, you can actually do a solution of kombucha, straight kombucha, like if you make it at home, or even some stuff you can buy. But test it. If you buy it, test it, make sure there's nothing else in it. But yeah, straight kombucha. You know, there's all sorts of recipes. You know, some people have had great success with diluted milk diluted in water. A little bit of apple cider vinegar diluted in water I've had success with. I'm talking specifically aqueous solutions you can use to combat powdery mildew by doing the same type of thing I'm doing now, by wiping the leaves clean of it. Now the thing with powdery mildew is that with powdery mildew, a fungal hyphae, a tendril of the fungus actually penetrates into the leaf. So even if you're wiping it off, in the case of powdery mildew, those tendrils are still in the leaf and they're going to regrow if the environment is fit for it. So that's why you use a solution, because the solution changes the pH of the leaf, and ideally it's a pH change that the leaf can tolerate, but that the fungus can't. And so you're knocking the fungus back and interrupting its life cycle, so it's harder for it to get going again. Almost done here. And you don't have to be so meticulous on it. Like, another great way to wash a plant like this is if you have now a pump sprayer isn't quite enough. Once the plant gets this much stuff caked on the leaf, you kind of have to have some abrasion, so I'm just using this tissue, right? But you see people who have house plants, they mist them like once a week. And if you mist them once a week, a lot of times that's just for humidity, for like maintaining the humidity of the plant, but also misting your plants, your indoor house plants, helps them clean the leaves off, right? So if you mist your plant regularly, it might not build up this much residue, depending on the plant, like the leaf structure and stuff. Some leaves just really can't be misted because they have such deep crevices that if you start misting them, all the dust or residue will just collect in those crevices and end up just concentrating. So something like that has like deep veining, I use like a soft paintbrush for. And I'll use more water, more liberally, so the water actually is like rolling away and rinsing off out of the crevices of the leaf all of the residue, helped by the bristles. But yeah, so you don't have to, like, what I'm doing right now is just, it's meticulous and time consuming because it hasn't been done in a long time. And you usually wouldn't have to do this if you had your plant outside, or if you gave it foliar sprays once in a while, or if you misted it down once in a while, whatever, right? But also, or if its leaves abscise. A lot of plants every winter, their leaves abscise. In fact, I was a little lazy. I was also going to bring the fig out here. So I had a fig tree that also has some residue on its leaves, black fig. And I was going to bring the black mission fig out here to show you side by side the residue on the leaf, because they were both in the same place. The black fig and this bear's lime were both sitting in the same place in the warehouse, collecting dust on the leaves. So in the case of the black fig, I'm not dusting off the leaves, I'm not wiping them down like this, because it's getting cold right now, it's November, and the fig does yearly abscission. You know, it's a deciduous tree, so it knows it's too cold, and right where the leaf is attached, it cuts it off naturally, right? You see this in the fall every year with all the trees letting their leaves go, all the broadleaves. But yeah, so, you know, you might see your two fruit trees and you might say, oh, they're getting dusty, I should wipe the leaves off, right? But, you know, you might not have to, because the leaves might be a week or two from falling off anyways, right? So that's the case with the fig. I didn't bring it out here, but I was going to bring it out here to show you how dirty the leaves were, and then show you that even though they were just as dirty as these ones, that they don't need to be wiped, because they're just going to fall off. But these do need to be wiped, because these little leaves here are how this plant eats. You know, plants, they don't get their food from the soil. That's a kind of a misnomer. Growers talk about feeding the soil or feeding the roots, but you're not actually giving, if you're using the analogy of food for a plant, the plant doesn't actually eat food through the plant's food source is light, and so therefore its mouth is the leaf, not the root. You know, so because, you know, 98% of all the biomass plant grows is synthesized entirely from air, water, nitrogen, carbon, and oxygen. Like the light, basically carbon dioxide, light, and water, right? And those three things create 98% of the biomass. And mineral availability, macro and micro nutrient availability, is what actually determines or influences the other 2%. Now, that's kind of a misnomer to say, because it gives the impression that if you had no minerals, you'd still get 98% effective growth, which you don't. It's actually more realistic to say that, a more realistic way to say it is that the mandatory minerals, trace minerals, you know, micro, macros, those mandatory minerals for plant growth, they're kind of like keys that unlock the plant's ability to photosynthesize, its ability to eat the sun, to eat the sunlight up. Because that's what plants do, they're sun eaters. And that's what cows are. They're vegetable eaters, they eat the vegetables. So the plants eat the sunlight energy. The herbivores eat the plant energy, which is stored sunlight energy. And then we eat the animals, which is the stored sunlight energy and the stored plant energy and the stored animal energy. And so we're sun eaters. Everything is a sun eater. We all eat the sun. Which is why so many civilizations have worshipped the sun. I mean, it's a very obvious connection to make, right? That sun up there gives us our food. Pretty simple. If it doesn't shine, we die. So I'm sure people have noticed that in the past. I digress. Almost done wiping down these leaves. It is a little time consuming, I know. But this plant will love it, because it's going to keep its leaves all, it's nice and mild here. All winter this plant will be protected. It'll keep its leaves. It'll keep chugging along, photosynthesizing. It's even got a fruit that's started developing on it. Fruit that's set maybe about a month ago, it looks like. It's just growing so slow because of the cold. Yeah, you know, wiping the leaves down like this is really great. Like, not only does the plant really appreciate it, but, you know, it gives you as a grower It gives you the opportunity to see your plant, to interact with it. You can find all sorts of egg sacs, all sorts of little curled leaf patterns, speckled leaf patterns, you know, wind damage. You might notice wind damage and think, oh, I should put it somewhere else. You might notice some damage from like the sun burning through a water droplet or some kind of crazy shit. And you might think, oh, maybe it's under a drip, or maybe it's like someplace where the sun is hitting it too intensely. You know, like if you really pay attention to your plant while you're doing something like this, you can learn a lot about its needs, about how it's actually being interacting with the environment in this time. Now, you might see a similar film to this on other plants. Like, for example, I'm thinking about how apple trees, naturally in September, August, October, depending on the variety, apple trees will all have a kind of like a, not all of them, but it's sometimes it's called a mother eventually once it gets to the stage of like apple cider, but it's a culture. It's like a yeast, a wild yeast that settles and grows on the surface of the apple, the fruit, and on the leaves. And sometimes you see apple trees or apples that have this like white haze on it, and it's I don't know, it's kind of not, it's not really fuzzy, I'd say, but it's kind of not really, it's not mold, it's not moldy, it's just like this haze of kind of biology. I think they're yeasts and stuff, different wild yeasts, because I know that's how you make, I made some wild cherry wine with just keeping that cloudiness on the, so I have to actually dip this in some water again for this guy. So it's starting to not take bits off the leaf. Yeah, so right here, I just wiped off some exoskeletons from some aphids. So it looks like, I don't know, maybe more than a month ago, about 5 or 6 aphids on this one leaf. They went through a stage of their life period where basically a winged aphid landed on the leaf, planted some aphids. They hatched, they lived on the leaf a little while, and then it got too cold and they died. So it was warm enough for them to start their life, but they came out at the wrong time. Probably a warm October day or something in the greenhouse there. When I say warehouse, it's a greenhouse warehouse, so it's like, it's the warehouse of the greenhouse, so it is sheltered enough that the, you know, temperature can swing. You can get a nice warm day in the winter. Yeah, so this girl's almost cleaned off. And like I said, you know, certain plants, like apples, might have a sheen like this, and that's just natural. That's like a yeast that's living on the leaf. But that's not what this is in this. This is just dust from an industrial area. Dust, residue, fumes, all sorts of random stuff from being in an area for 10 months without getting washed or rained on. But it's looking good. I'm really happy with the decision to wipe this girl down. She's good enough. Like, I'm not going to keep going. Anyways, yeah. Oh, also a fun little fact: Bear's limes are actually lemon trees. Anyways, have a good one.